admiring you. Good job.
I was trying to remember the 517 going through there. Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody back to Alabama Care. Today we have Mr. Greg Graber, the mental performance coach and educational leader. And today we're going to be talking about his book, Slow Your Roll, Mindfulness for Fast Times. At this point, I'd like to hand it over. Mr. Graber, if you would introduce yourself.
It is an honor to be here. I know we've been talking about this for a little while. So I'm really into mindfulness and social emotional learning. I was a longtime school principal, and I kind of fell in love with mindfulness just because of the personal benefits that I got from having a practice. And we implemented it here at Lausanne Collegiate School, where I now serve as director of social emotional learning, and I do a lot of consulting around the country and with different schools. Yeah.
So we kind of got hooked up because, as I did just before this broadcast, I like to do a breathing exercise. Kind of helps me calm down a little bit before going live or having an interview. And we've worked with United Ability and Mr. David Barry for a number of broadcasts on location. And he has seen me do a little bit of breathing exercise. And he goes, I got a buddy. He's an author, Mr. Graber, who specializes in this stuff. And he talks about a lot of really cool things that the disability community could really benefit from, whether that's in education or being a parent. Now, you mentioned that you were a principal and you started to implement some of these practices. Was that more with students, like leading a class, or was it more with teachers, kind of helping them?
It was both. So to make a long story short, my wife got me into it sort of as a way for me to process stress. So working as a school principal can be stressful at times, even though I loved it. We were the first school in the deep South here in Memphis to implement a mindfulness program during the day for our students, but we also did it for our teachers as well from a self-care perspective. Because for caregivers, it's a great way for them to deal with the perils of burnout or compassion fatigue or stress. So really our whole community has embraced it. We've been doing it here for about, I'd say, a dozen years, way before it was considered kind of mainstream like it is now.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes people hear mindfulness, meditation, breathing techniques, and they think of kind of Eastern mysticism. That's not how we do it here in the South. And it's caught a lot more mainstream in the past few years. And I first really got introduced to it. So I was a college athlete and I wrestled in college, and I also studied physics. And I was feeling a sense of spiritual want there. And I was just going through Barnes and Nobles, and I came across this book. It was The Tao of Physics. And it was kind of how physics and Eastern mysticism or religions were really related there. But it got into, kind of the breathing and who we are and the energy behind it. And then I started reading more into, the purpose of having that time to yourself and meditating there. And I'm very early on this journey, but I want to continue it. And that's why I kind of jumped at this opportunity for us to talk. And I have to admit, I have not finished. I have a few more chapters to go. But how does going from a principal and implementing this in your school system, how do you go from that to then, I kind of want to give this to more people and writing a book and becoming an author?
So it's interesting. You're talking about sports. So different people started reaching out to me once they heard about my story. So I work typically with 6 Division I NCAA men's basketball teams. I've worked from everyone from LSU to Texas to Marquette. This time of year, I fly around a lot working with those teams. But it's really applicable and it's beneficial in every domain, whether it's education, where we first started it, or working with sports teams or corporate executives. I teach it from sort of a secular perspective, not a spiritual perspective, because there are great physiological and neurological and psychological benefits. And simply what you're talking about, like breathing slowly through your nose, holding it for a second, and breathing out even slower through your mouth does three things. One, it carries oxygen to our brain, so it gets us focused, gets us centered. Two, it drops our blood pressure. And three, it lowers our heart rate. So there's great science in this. While a lot of people want to kind of tack it into something like spiritual enlightenment and all that kind of stuff, I think that's really neat. But if you just use it even on a base perfunctory level for performance and sort of calming anxiety, it's really powerful too. This week in the media, it went viral. There was a major test study that says doing this kind of conscious breathing and meditation and mindfulness activities can be just as effective as medicine such as Zoloft for helping us sort of contain anxiety. So there's great science behind it.
Yeah, and I feel like I would want it to be mentioned earlier on in the medical community. So before you start getting a prescription, maybe we start here. Things you can do at your house. One of the things that I really like about these techniques that we're going to be talking about is it doesn't necessarily take 2 weeks for you to see the benefits. When I do a breathing exercise, I can feel that as I'm doing it. I can feel it immediately. And I feel like that's one of the things that is attractive about, having mindfulness and doing some of these techniques is you can change your mind frame in a few seconds if you have a routine there.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, without a doubt. And, the beauty of it is it's so practical. And as an educator, the nomenclature that I use is it's emotional regulation, skills, emotional intelligence, cognitive control. These are sort of activities or techniques that enhance those social and emotional learning skills for all of us. If you think about it, in a lot of ways, our breath is an emotional barometer to our internal states, what's going inside with our feelings and emotions. And if our breath is kind of loose and free flowing, we're in a pretty good spot mentally and emotionally. But if it's constricted or tight, then we're not. So it's interesting how you can use these techniques, as an adult, in the workforce or as a parent or as a child at school. These are really neat things. And what I like about it is we're starting to see more and more of this kind of stuff being taught in schools, these kind of emotional intelligence, soft skills, as they call it.
Now, when you say more and more in schools, I know you're traveling and working with a number of NCAA professional sports teams. Are educators in school systems, are they having experts come in and teach kind of big conference rooms? What does that look like?
Without a doubt, and I'm in Memphis, and we're similar to Alabama, in Birmingham, cultural wise. Like in the South, we're typically love it here, love the South. We're a little bit slower with this kind of stuff. So it's been on the East Coast, like in the Boston, New York areas for a long time, and of course out west in California. Now we're starting to see it in some of the southern cities more, like Charlotte and Dallas, more in Memphis, Atlanta. So it's starting to catch on. A lot of people are kind of ignorant about it, though, kind of what you said. They want to like it's some kind of indoctrination to some weird Eastern mysticism or something. It's not like that at all. If you want to look at it from a spiritual perspective, mindfulness exists in every major world faith, whether it's the Episcopalians with a centering prayer, or Catholicism with rosary beads, looking at the rosary beads, feeling the rosary beads. It's a type of meditation to clear your mind. It's a singular focus activity. Jewish people in the Wailing Wall. So while it doesn't have to be something spiritual, it can always be argued that, okay, for me, I never understood. It's rare that I hear this now. When I started this years ago, people would say, well, I'm against mindfulness. Well, hold on, let me break that down. You're against being mindful with your thoughts, emotions, and actions, because you're either mindful or you're mindless. There's no in between. And mindfulness simply is just paying attention to the present moment. It's what it's all about.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people, when they first hear mindfulness and they think maybe of Eastern mysticism or religion, they think, well, that doesn't fit into my Sunday prayers
Yeah,
or my Sunday church. But you can find a lot of those feelings and those practices in all religions, as you've mentioned, that kind of
without
go
a
along
doubt.
with.
And like
And you
everything
also
else, yeah,
go
like
ahead.
everything
Sorry.
else has been, it's been politicized in the last year or two, which is kind of crazy. I don't want to get off on a tangent one way or the other, but it's, we kind of live in this potentially divisive society where we can all be sort of manipulated or indoctrinated by social media. So it's interesting. There's been like boycotts and people against it in some schools across the country. I don't really understand why. It's like saying you don't want your child to learn emotional intelligence, essentially. But um, I think it's getting better.
That emotional intelligence is a phrase that I'm hearing more and more. I want to follow up on that question a little bit later in our talking points. You mentioned something about how your breathing is a direct response to how your body's feeling. And oftentimes, if I'm in a stressful situation, so I'll get social anxiety sometimes. I'll notice that my breaths are shorter even before I know. I'm like, oh, wait, I'm not comfortable here. If I just pay attention to how my chest and my belly is interacting, it's like, okay, we just need to regulate this. Everything else will flow out of this. But to be
Yes.
conscious of that. Now, you mentioned something, a phrase there, mindfulness versus mindful. What was the second one? Mindfulness versus.
Mindlessness. Yeah, you're either mindful or you're either paying attention or you're not. You either have self awareness or you don't. There's no in between. That's, when people, every now and then I would get early on in the days when I was presenting, like at a corporate event or something, or even at a school, a teacher would come up maybe afterwards. I don't know if I really believe in this mindfulness stuff. There's nothing really to believe in. Um, so you're either very mindful or you're mindless, basically.
And
There's no
to
no
you,
in between.
if in defining mindfulness, is that just being there in the present moment?
Exactly right. Being there in the present moment with as little judgment as possible. So
Mm.
typically, if you think about it, our species, we do a lot of time traveling in our minds. We're either vociferating on the past, trying to redo something that's already done in our minds, or we're typically fixated on the future, what's right around the corner. And there's a reason for that. From an evolutionary survival perspective, depending on what you believe, we are either created or we're wired that way to focus on any perceived threat right around the corner because that helps us to survive. But it doesn't always make us very productive or happy. So, what we try to tell the people that we work with, the essence of mindfulness is, of course, you learn from the past and you definitely plan for the future, but you don't fixate on the future. You take care of the future by taking care of each and every step of the present moment.
Mm. And you spoke a little bit about how we're wired, and maybe some of those threats in the past allowed us to be here today. If there's a lion, we want to be a little bit wired. It helps us
Yes,
get to the
or
next
without a
generation.
doubt. Without a doubt. You go back to like prehistoric days when we're hunters and gatherers, there's a reason we were created, in my belief, this way. If we can see a saber-toothed tiger coming through the bushes or hear it, or another tribe that's going to invade our hut, then we get on red alert, right? And that sort of sets off our sympathetic nervous system, where our heart starts beating faster, our palms get sweaty, our breathing gets tight and constricted, but it blocks all of our thoughts out except for sort of the threat at hand. So you're absolutely
Yeah,
right. There's a reason for that. But now, if you think about it, we live in this sedentary society where we're sitting most of the day at work. And a lot of those threats that we're wired for, they don't really take place anymore. But we still have that going on in our minds, if that makes sense.
yeah. I don't think there's probably that much that's changed in the last couple thousand years to when we had saber-tooths over our shoulder. When you look at, however long we've been here. Um, to me, one of the things that helps me a lot is I still need that burst of energy, a release during the day. And that comes for me in the form of maybe going to the Y for a swim or going to play ice hockey. I enjoy playing ice hockey now, but I always notice if I have that burst of release where it's like really high intense emotions, I'm a lot more calm throughout the day.
Yeah, we need to move. It's good for us. Not only we all know it's good for our bodies, but it's good for our minds too. Those endorphins from exercise are sort of really has a calming effect. It's good for us.
Mm-hmm. There are a few phrases from your book I'd like to ask you to go a little bit further in depth in. The first one is thinking on thinking. And I never thought about it like that. But take us deep into there.
Yeah, a lot of times we don't really think about our thoughts. We act on any thought that we have. And the interesting thing, I was working with an off-season football team yesterday in inner city Memphis, and I asked them to start sort of framing their thoughts or the way that they see their thoughts in a different way, so it could be more effective and more productive if we see our thoughts as mental activity, not always absolute truths. We don't have to take the bait to every thought that pops into our head, especially if it's something that we call a negative thought or a thought that conjures up self doubt. And, scientists argue over how many thoughts we have in a 24-hour period. I've seen estimates of upwards to 70,000 thoughts in a 24-hour period. It's about 48 thoughts a minute. I'm not really good at math. I was an English major, but we're never going to stop our thoughts. And the worst thing that we can do with our thoughts, if we have a thought that isn't helpful or is negative or it conjures up self-doubt, is to have mental resistance to a thought.
Hmm.
Sometimes I'll be presenting to a group and I'll say, try this little experiment. Try not to think about what you're thinking about right now. You're just going to think about it even more. We're better off to mentally lean into our thoughts. And there's a little rhyme that we teach the kids. If we can name it, we can tame it. Instead of trying to ignore it, cram it down, push it away, or it's just going to come out, so to speak, sideways or the wrong way and make it stronger. If we notice it, label it, name it and tame it, whatever it is, anger, jealousy, I'm scared, I'm anxious, it's going to go away quicker. It's interesting how that works. It seems counterproductive almost, but it really
As
works
long as you
well.
can identify it, you can kind of deal with it and let it go in a way.
Exactly. Exactly. It's the three A's. It's awareness, bringing your awareness to it, acceptance, accepting what it is, and then action, taking action.
Yeah, I notice, and I'm sure everybody does, we all have negative thoughts at some point. And like you said, that's probably never going to go away. We're hardwired
No.
to be those beings. But if we have a process in place, if we're having 48 thoughts a minute, and let's say 20 of those are negative, 28 of them are positive, if we can go from 20 negative down to 10, that's a quarter of our life that's more positive thought process.
Oh, without a
Just
doubt. And it helps to, instead of identifying as being your thoughts, start trying to see yourself as the observer of your thoughts. Puts a little space between you and your thoughts. And it's interesting in Ireland when they have thoughts or maybe feelings that aren't helpful, um, instead of saying I'm sad, they'll say sadness is upon me. Little sort of nuanced language. I don't want to say tricks, but for lack of a better term, like that help as well. You're not mad, you're not angry, you're whatever your name is, you're just, that thought is just visiting you, and knowing that it's temporary and it's going to pass really helps.
I think about that sometimes when you see, and from all thoughts and ideas, is sometimes you'll see the same ideas in a product. launch in various countries. The people had no interaction. And that makes me think, is there just this sea above us of thoughts that are just kind of coming and going, and they just come down and touch us sometimes? And it's like, oh, I had that idea. Somebody else had that exact idea in that same sea somewhere else.
Yeah,
There's no
it's
science behind
interesting.
that.
Yeah, it's interesting.
um,
We
but it is
yeah we
what
teach kids to see little thought bubbles that come up, and which one do you want to deal with? Which one's worth your time? You know.
it's interesting how the language can shape your thoughts as well. You mentioned just how it was Scotland that references it. Is this thought is coming to me, or this feeling is coming to me? I am not it. That is not who I am. But that is experiencing. My being is experiencing that right now, and that's okay. I'm going to let it go now. As opposed to like, or in continuation of that. Um, if you have kids and they're not behaving like getting A's or doing their homework, or, you're successful. The things that you're doing right now aren't successful, and you're not the unsuccessful part of that. It's just what's in front of you right now. We need to let that go and get back to who you are.
Exactly right. And a big part of it is one thing that the mindfulness and the meditation can teach us is to listen to our internal dialogue. So we all have that little voice of internal dialogue in our brains. Some people call it the ego. And working with a lot of these professional and collegiate basketball players, I'll ask them when they mess up and they get really frustrated, how do you talk to yourself internally? What does the voice in your head sound like? And they're like, wow, man, when I mess up, I berate myself. It's terrible. Well, what happens when a teammate of yours messes up? How do you talk to them out loud? Well, I encourage them. I give them a slap on the backside, a high five. I tell them they got this. Well, what if you start listening to that voice in your head, and then instead of berating yourself, get in the habit of encouraging yourself? That's very helpful too. And that's a helpful habit that can help all of us.
I am directly, that is me when I play hockey. If I make a bad play, my mind goes to, you don't belong in this league. Everyone's younger and faster than you. Don't do that. But if I have a teammate that makes a slip up, dude, next play, next play.
Oh, without a doubt. And it's all of us, not just playing hockey at work, at school, if we get a bad grade, whatever it is. It's again, it's the way that we're wired. But
Yeah.
we can build on that, and we can change that mindset.
Now, you mentioned thinking about these thoughts as coming in and then being able to, look at them in a different way. One of the tactics that is in your book is meditation and meditation habits. I've attempted to do meditation. I've done it probably 20, 30 times throughout my life. I don't have a consistent habit. One of the things that always happens to me, though, is it's too noisy and I want it to stop within the first few
Yeah.
minutes. There's just so many things going on up here, and it's like I got to go do something.
So it's probably the way that you're looking at it, and that's not uncommon. I would say most people who have meditated and don't do it anymore, have quit after a few times, they don't understand what the objective should be. So, and I wish someone would have told me years ago when I started meditating that the objective isn't to clear your mind. 70,000 thoughts in a 24-hour period, 48 thoughts in a minute. We're never able to clear our minds. What the way that I frame it, the way that I look at meditation, it's self-observation. So even if I sit down for 5 minutes, 10 minutes every morning, I close my eyes, I try to focus on my breathing, but my mind is all over the place, thoughts, distractions, memories, whatever. My timer goes off after 5 or 10 minutes. There's no such thing as a good or bad meditation session. Even if my mind was all over the place, it was still an opportunity for me to observe my thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And now I know what's on my mind. I spent some time observing my mind, and I can go deal with it and sort it out in real life.
Mm.
That's what meditation is really about. Every now and then, you may get some little sliver of stillness and silence that you get, but it's few and far between. It's not like that Zen thing where I'm going to get enlightened and sort of feel like I'm floating on a cloud, and you're always going to hear stuff.
I feel like sometimes beginners and me involved in that feel like my goal in the meditation process is to get that sliver, is to get that
That's the
little in
problem.
the moment. Yeah.
Having a goal is the problem. Like a real purist would tell you, there is no goal. You just kind of sit and do it. And it's such an incremental process. You know, we live in this culture, not you, but children especially now, where everything is at the push of a button. And we love it. The modern conveniences of Uber Eats and Netflix. I can stream Ted Lasso, watch all of them on Apple TV whenever I want. It's beautiful to have this stuff. But kids now have this sort of mindset of instant gratification. And just the mere thought of them having to sit quietly alone with their thoughts and emotions for 5 or 10 minutes. It's crazy. What do we do when we're bored? We pick up a phone when we're in the doctor's office or waiting for our car to be serviced. We don't allow ourselves to be bored. We pick up a
Mm-hmm.
phone. And every time we get on social media, it's a hit of dopamine to our brains. And it's the opposite of mindfulness. It conjures up that term that you like, mindlessness. And I've heard the term before of our phones called emotional pacifiers. We
Yeah.
scroll to bore ourselves and to numb our thoughts and emotions. Phones in and of themselves aren't a bad thing. I love my phone. I do my business on my phone. I post on social media, but we have to be very intentional about what we're doing on our phones when we're using them. And we should also be very mindful about how much media we're consuming on a daily basis. I think the
Now,
statistic is something crazy like the average American is looking at a screen 12 hours a day, whether it's a phone, TV, iPad, whatever it is, computer, 12 hours. It's a lot.
I'm guilty of a lot of that. I spend a lot of time online on my phone, and it is almost like you mentioned at the doctor's office. I got it here. I'm going to open up Reddit. I'm going to, read this thing, whatever that looks like. Do you think people were more mindful back in the day before the era of electronic media?
Oh, without a doubt. And again, I love technology. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I'm a huge soccer fan, big Arsenal guy. I can watch it on my Peacock app on my phone, no matter where I am. You know, my wife's out of town. I can get my very unhealthy Popeye spicy chicken sandwich delivered to my front porch. Granted, it's $30, but yeah, without a doubt, I think, and it's not an evil thing. It's just we have an over reliance to it, and these tech companies and social media companies, they're incentivized to capture our attention. There's a wonderful book I highly recommend called Stolen Focus. And it talks about this. The longer they can get us on their social media sites, the more advertising they can sell. So, you know, there's that saying that if you don't pay for the product, basically you are the product. So it's just something to think about. And I'm not advocating not using this stuff. I think it has some good purposes. We just need to, from time to time, reflect and contemplate on how we're using it and making sure we're using it and it's not using us.
Yeah, kind of regulate it a little bit. It can be a tool, but like any tool that we're going to build, there's positives and negatives to that. I remember hearing a story. I can't remember if it was some kid show, maybe Coco Melon, but they analyzed how quick the frames changed and the kids, how long they would watch the show. And the ones that the kids watched the longest, the frames changed every 3 seconds. When we look back to cartoons when I was a kid, maybe it was a frame for 10 or 15 seconds. But nowadays, these YouTube videos, they're trying to change the frames every 3 seconds to keep the kids guessing what's going to be on next.
Oh, it's
And
crazy. Yeah, there's a study that came out a few years ago. The average American attention span in the year 2000 was 12 seconds. So we could willfully sustain our attention on one thing for 12 seconds without breaking thought. Then in 2015, it went down to 8 seconds. I was talking about this yesterday at a keynote that I was giving, and someone said, well, maybe that's not too bad. It is if you consider a goldfish reportedly has a 9 second attention span. I don't know how they ascertain. I don't know how they figure that out. If they, someone always asks when I say that, uh, how do they know that? I guess they look at the eyes to see where it's looking, but it's interesting though.
It makes you think, where are we going in the next 20 years? Are we going to go down to three or
Yeah,
four? And
yeah.
what does that look like for just everyday society? If we're coming back to, kids are now having a shorter attention span, they're used to all this clicking, everything in front of their face. And then we have a traditional school setting where there's a classroom and you have to pay attention. I'm sure it is, I'm sure the teachers and I know parents at home are feeling a little bit of this. This isn't how it was when I was at your age.
Yeah, I agree. I think some of that may be nostalgia. I'm in my 50s, so I'm kind of at that stage where, I used to walk to school at 12 miles in the snow every day, even though I'm in Memphis and it never snows, right? But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where it goes.
Yeah, be cool. It's a cool time to be alive right now with everything going on. So let's get back
It
into
really,
the meditation. The way that we're talking about it, sometimes I try and do everything. I'm like, all right, I can get everything done at the last minute. And maybe if I just meditate for an hour, I'm going to hit that Zen peak there. But the way I should be thinking about it is, just as I go, and I like to go to the YMCA and I like to go play hockey, this is a daily thing that I need to start doing in incremental 5 minute periods.
without a doubt, consistency is more important than the duration length of each session. So what I advise people to do is start with 5 minutes every morning. Do it the same time every day. If it's in the morning, I do it in the morning. So I don't want to say because it's out of the way, so I won't forget to do it. But if you're not a morning person and you need to do it at night, make it around the same time every day, because from a habit forming perspective, there's a better chance that you'll keep doing it. And every week, add a minute or so until you get to about 10 or 12 minutes. That's plenty time. A lot of people think with meditation, like everything else, that more is better, and that's not necessarily true. I'd rather you have a good solid 5 minutes than an hour where it's kind of a waste of your time.
Now that we're talking about things that I can do individually, but what if I'm a parent um, and my household is going crazy? Got three kids. Maybe I have a son or daughter that has a disability, and everything is just going hectic. Now, do I take time for myself to go and do a little meditation, or do I lead my children and say, hey guys, each pick a corner of the room? And similarly, as a teacher, if my classroom is just hectic right now, they just got in from recess, do I take a 5 minute, we're going to have quiet meditation time?
Ideally, but I know it's not always going to be possible because we all live such busy, hectic lives. It would be great if the parent or caregiver or educator can do their own session, because self compassion is so important. And it's difficult really to do it if you're leading it or teaching it at the same time. From someone who leads sessions all the time, I stumble on that often. I figure, oh, good, I'm working with a group today, so I don't have to meditate on my own. But then really, I'm kind of worried about the others doing it and leading it in the right way. So it's not really the same quality always. Um,
Yeah.
but and there's some great things out there for kids on YouTube. And of course, there are apps like Headspace and Calm and Insight Meditation Timer that has really wonderful stuff for kids and adults.
You've mentioned, it kind of reminds me of hearing that is, you can't take care of others if you haven't taken care of yourself first. So you need to give yourself that replenishment there. And we do see that, as you've mentioned, in caregiver burnout, whether that is someone that you're bringing into the home, or more than likely, especially at the young age, it's moms. And moms are being the caregivers for their children. They're trying to get everybody, out on schedule, and then they're responsible when they come home. And they can have caregiver burnout. I think sometimes you see that. We have other anchors on here that are fathers to a son or daughter with a disability, and he has talked about the divorce rate in disability relationships as high as 80%. And I would
Wow.
say, yeah, that is, his thing is, if you become part of a network, a peer support group, join our dad's group, we have very low divorce rates because you have that help. But I think you also need to do a little bit of that self-help too, and meditation is part of that process that you need to incorporate.
Amen. Amen to that. It's the oxygen mask on the airplane metaphor. I know you've heard this before. When they're going over the flight attendants, the safety precautions, they always say when the oxygen mask drops, put yours on first and breathe before you take care of the person next to you. And I'm a little bit older than you, but I grew up, my parents' generation, great people, but we had this whole thing that like self care is kind of lavish, that it's indulgent, and it's not. You have to take care of yourself first and foremost, or you're no good to the people who you're supposed to take care of.
Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping to start that, as you say in the book, a streak. And streaks can be very helpful. And to document that, you've mentioned apps. I actually have the Calm app. And if I'm having trouble going to bed, I put that thing on. I'm out in probably 5 minutes. I like doing the
Oh,
whole breathing, thinking through, and I get knocked out in 5 minutes. It's perfect.
I love it. It's great stuff. Yeah, I've heard their sleep stories is really good. I think that's what it's called on Calm.
Yeah.
You like that?
Now, another technique that you've mentioned in the book is visualization. And yeah, just give us an introduction to visualization. I'll come up with a few more questions there.
Yeah, it's kind of like mental imagery. So let's say I'll use basketball as an example because that's really on my mind right now. It's what I'm doing a lot of. So I'm working with a college basketball team, and then we'll plug it into how it works in different sort of domains. So let's say I'm working with a 3-point shooter. I'll ask him the night before the game to go to his dorm room or his apartment, close his eyes, take a couple of deep breaths, and visualize himself behind the 3-point line, going up for a shot. And his form is good, his technique is good. Of course, it's going to be smooth and flawless while he's watching himself take that shot. But to really seal it into his brain, I ask him to tie it in as much as he can, or she, to their 5 senses. So, in other words, what does the ball feel like in your hand? What does the court sound like under your feet? What are you seeing? What are you smelling? What do the lights look like? What are you hearing? What's the crowd sound like? And the science behind that is when they get into a pressure filled situation, because they've rehearsed it so many times, sort of not just visually, but through all of their 5 senses, it locks it in their brain. So they've pictured it so many times through this mental imagery, the brain doesn't know whether it's actually physically happening or not, or it's just being imagined. So they're almost a half quick stepper, faster, I'm sorry, during the game. And also they go up for that shot a little looser, both physically and mentally, and they're more apt to hit the shot. And I'll give you another example. I worked with a lady, gosh, it's probably been a decade ago, who was a classical violinist. And she had a concert at a symphony hall in Montana, I remember. So we would do the same thing with her. I would have her close her eyes and visualize herself holding the bow, having the violin under her chin. What does the stage sound like? How does it creak when she walks out there? What does the spotlight feel like? What does the symphony hall smell like? And all that kind of stuff. So really great science. Some people do this, but they'll leave off the part about the 5 senses, and it's not effective if you do that.
Yeah, I love that it was in the book and that you're talking about it. The first time that I was introduced to it, I was a freshman going into sophomore year in high school, and I went to a wrestling camp. It was put on by the University of Minnesota in Pennsylvania, where I grew up in Pennsylvania. And at the end of each session, it was a 2-week long camp. It was extremely hard. That at the end of each session, when you're just tired, you're all sweaty, you lay down on the mat, and we did about a 15-minute visualization of what does it look like for you to win championship. That was the first time I went through it, and I did I did the exercise, um, and it was something new to me at that time. And I see it pop up more and more in different routes. Um, like I kind of think of even at a visualization kind of thing as like a storyboard as well. Putting a storyboard on your wall so you know where you're going to be or where you're going to go. Or they say, go and sit in that Lamborghini that you want or whatever you're looking at. Go and visit that house that's on the market. Um, and it's almost like you've been there before, you're more likely to get there. So it's like
Yeah, if you, yeah,
you're transporting
yeah, if you can
yourself
see
into the
it, you
future.
can be it, right? Yeah, without a doubt. I was presenting one time on this to a team, and one of the college athletes said, "Well, it's kind of like The Secret, right?" And I'm like, "No, not really, because in The Secret, you kind of imagine that a big check shows up in your mailbox, and then you go out and it's there. It's not like that. You still have to do the work, but you're right. If you can see it, you can kind of make it happen, and you're a little more comfortable in that particular environment dealing with it.
Yeah, it's like you've been there. You mentioned in that basketball example, you're less stressed in that time, in that moment, because your mind has gone through that process before. It's not something new. You've been there before. And the science behind it is amazing. That your mind, and I've even heard from runners, like their muscles kind of twitch when they're going through visualization. Um,
Yeah,
and
I
they're,
used to
they're
do.
training.
I was an ultra. Yeah, I was an ultra runner and a streak runner and all that kind of. I used to do. It's powerful, and I've worked with Ironman athletes. So my wife is a five-time Ironman. They do that little race where they swim 2.5 miles, then they bike 112 miles, then they run the little parts, the marathon, 26.2
Yeah.
miles. We'll visualize things like, well, let's say you get a flat tire, see yourself fixing it and getting back on the bike, or you get a cramp when you're swimming, or something goes wrong when you're running. How do you figure your way out of it, type thing? So
hmm and I think it can be. So I did a sprint try in Phoenix, Arizona. I've never done a full try. The Ironman in Arizona, we would go to and watch, and it was just incredible to see the athletes there. Utmost respect for your running and your wife's, athleticism there. Um,
thank you.
I think we
She's
could,
the athlete in the family, not me, but thank you.
I think we could also do it on a daily. So the night before, what does a perfect day look like tomorrow? If I walk into this meeting, what does a perfect meeting look like? How do we open and close that? That way, when I get in that situation, if I have a negative thought, it's like, no, no, I've already been through this process. We go the positive way. It's just like you're building a road and you got there a little bit early so you can direct it a little bit. And the deeper feelings you have when you go through the visualization carve that road a little bit bigger so the water can flow down that path as opposed to another.
Oh, without a
So
doubt. And you're right. And even if someone doesn't do a full-fledged visualization, if it's for something like a meeting that you're talking about, just a little bit of mental preparation on the front end, thinking about taking the time and thinking about what possible scenarios might pop up and how am I going to be ready for them.
now I hear conflicting though, because visualization, I want to think about that. But then I also hear mindfulness in the moment. Don't think about future. Don't put myself out there thinking about that too much. How do you regulate those two?
That's interesting. I've never really thought about that. I guess the way that I would say it is visualization is going to prepare you for that present moment when you're engaged in that activity.
And even in the visualization, you're putting yourself in that present moment. So when you get there, it is present. I'd have to think through that.
Correct.
Um,
That was a great
but
question. I don't know if I was more impressed with your question or that quick answer that I gave it, but that was a great question.
no, I think because it is a tendency to like obsess sometimes over tomorrow is maybe something big is going on tomorrow, or there's a meeting or something. So I'll obsess over it, but then I need to come back and stop the visualizations, be mindful because there's six things that I should be doing in the next hour that are going to better prepare me when that time comes. And so you got to bring
Yeah.
it back and be.
I would say there's a difference between obsession or obsessing about something that's coming up and or mentally preparing for it. If you're mentally preparing for it, you're being very intentional with your thoughts. It's not like you're obsessing and catastrophizing about what may go wrong. You're being proactive to prepare for that present moment event when it takes place.
We've talked about both visualization and meditation. We kind of skipped over breathing and the importance of breathing to get yourself in that mind frame. If you could talk a little bit about the science behind breathing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Scientists tell us we have upwards of 24,000 breaths in a 24-hour period every day, but we don't pay much attention to our breathing. And like I said a little while ago, our breathing really can be used as a barometer for our emotional states, where we are kind of psychologically. And like I said, there's really no right or wrong way to do it except, breathe in slowly through your nose, hold it for a second, and then your exhale should always be a little bit slower than your inhale was. And it's going to carry that oxygen to your brain and really get you in the present moment. It's going to lower your blood pressure. It's going to drop your heart rate. You can always tell athletes who've worked with someone like me, say you're watching a basketball game, you're going to notice at the free throw line, the players that breathe before they take that shot, they've worked with someone. It's very intentional. They're slowing down their mind. They're slowing down their emotions. They're slowing down their actions. They're getting their mind and their body and their emotions in sync before they take that shot. So, what
Here in
I would say,
Alabama, go ahead.
go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, here in Alabama, we're huge college football. And one person that I always think is so calm on the field is the Alabama quarterback, Bryce Young. No matter what happened in the play, no matter if you ran around in the pocket or sprinted downfield for 20 yards, when they do a close up of his face, he's just calm.
Oh yeah,
In and
he's a
out.
neutral gear. He's been taught. One of the things that we tell our players is you either let go or you get dragged, and you have to let go of that last play. From a basketball perspective, if a player hits a terrible shot and he's upset about it and can't let go about it, he'll go down on the other end of the court and get a really dumb foul. So I know Nick Saban is all into this. He doesn't call it mindfulness. He calls it being in the process, kind of one step at a time. It's the same thing. I've had the honor of working with some great Alabama teams. I've worked with Alabama softball before and Patrick Murphy, wonderful program. And then at UAB in Birmingham, when Rob Eson was the coach, I worked with their basketball program there. So we've got some good mindfulness in sports things still going on in Alabama.
I think it's kind of leading the way, and I think we're going to see it more and more in corporate and education, like you're doing. And when you speak about if you have a bad shot, you're going to go down and make a bad play, that sounds like compounding interest to me. It can either be good
Without
or
a
it can be bad.
Yeah, exactly.
Now,
Exactly.
with breathing, why in through your nose and out through your mouth? Now, when I'm out there on the ice, sometimes I just want to open up my mouth. I want to bend over at the hip. I want to be hunched over. But my coaches have always told me, be upright, put your shoulders back, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Why is that?
Because when you're breathing in through your nose, it's going to get it in quicker to your brain when you do that. We don't want to always just kind of breathe through our mouth. There's a great book, I think it's actually called Breathe. Gets really into the science of it. It's kind of one of the things that I teach, but I'm not like really sort of super well versed in sort of the science and physics of it. But you could get really deep on this stuff if you want to.
Yeah, I've heard before. I can't remember if it was a quote I heard, but somebody mentioned that um, the more likely you are to breathe out of your mouth, the shorter lifespan you will have. I don't know what's
Yeah,
behind that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In this book that I'm talking about called Breathe, I want to say the author's last name might be Nestor, something like that. He actually tapes his mouth shut as an experiment. So it's interesting.
I'd be claustrophobic there. I don't know if I can do that.
I'm with you.
So emotional intelligence is something that comes up in conversation. It's been said that it is more valuable than IQ. What exactly is emotional intelligence?
Yeah, emotional intelligence is basically the way that we manage ourself and we manage sort of social situations and our interactions with others and sort of how we manage our emotions. So now what we're seeing is, and I'm sure you've heard about this, in a lot of corporate cultures, it's starting to be they're really testing for emotional intelligence above and beyond workplace skills, even. They figure they can always teach people workplace skills, but emotional intelligence, the ability to get along with other people, to be able to have conflict resolution skills, to be able to manage our emotions in a healthy way and work with people in constructive ways when we may not always agree with them. That's why emotional intelligence is so important.
It sounds less reactionary. If something comes across and is making you feel angry or sad, doing the tactics that you're talking about in your book and then being present with them again and coming at it
Exactly right.
from
Yeah,
a new perspective.
this kind of mindfulness stuff gives us more self-awareness, but also more social awareness too. And that
And when we're
enhances
talking,
that sort of
when,
enhances our emotional intelligence.
when we're talking about it as a workout, a daily thing, it would be like the corporations are looking to make sure that you can. One thing besides Excel is that you can do some squats at 125 pounds or something like that. But they're looking for, can you be in a rough scenario? Have you been training yourself through breathing, through meditation, those types of things, so that you can come to the table and pass this performance test of being in an environment that may be uneasy at times and with people that you don't agree with at times. But it takes that daily going to the gym mentally to be able to do that at work as well and in your family as
Exactly
well.
right. Exactly right. It's a great metaphor for it.
I would like to read a quote from a middle school teacher and parent of a middle school student that is in the beginning of your book here. And then I'd like to dive a little bit more into the disability community. So, guys, directly how to slow your roll, mindfulness for fast times. The quote begins: As an educator and a parent of a middle school child with a learning disability, I have benefited from Greg's mindfulness sessions. The information I have learned in these sessions has enabled me to be more proactive in monitoring her time with electronics and giving her more opportunities to be creative on her own and live in the moment. As a result, I have seen a difference in her performance in school and ability to focus longer on a single task. Greg's sessions have been an eye opener for me on how to best give our children a good balance in and out of the classroom. Julie Cooper, middle school teacher and parent, middle school student. So here we have somebody that is a parent of a child with a disability, also deals with students on a daily basis, that is implementing these habits here. And I'm going to go over them. So, breathing, daily meditation habits, visualization that she's implementing on a daily basis that are having impacts the day she's doing them and are compounding over time to give a better experience for her family and for those around her at work.
Yeah, I
That's huge.
think what Julie was talking about was sort of she started a mindfulness practice for herself and it led to her having sort of more patience and less impulsivity and giving her more of a sense of calm and making her less reactive than previously before. So she was in turn sort of better in tune with herself, but also it made her, according to what she said, sort of a more effective and more attentive caregiver for her child.
So I'll throw a curveball at you. Me and my girlfriend and her two youngest children are in the car last night running some errands. We're going to Chick-fil-A. Uh, and there's a little spat that happens in the back seats between the two. Two boys go at it. They want ice cream from Chick-fil-A. Our immediate reaction in the front seats are, if you guys don't stop it, you're not getting ice cream. And then one more sound went off. It's like, boom, that's it. No more ice cream. Hope you guys figure that out. But it was pretty reactionary thinking back to last night. So how should I do that a little bit different to have a more positive interaction?
Yeah, mindfulness isn't some quick fix panacea where, you do this stuff and then you have all the right answers. It just gives you a little bit of space, hopefully sometimes between stimulus and response, if that makes
So
sense.
it's
So if you were, it could sort of, you get real comfortable in that gap between stimulus and response, and instead of reacting, maybe you respond.
so it's another tool to use in the belt. It's not your end all be all.
Correct. Absolutely. It's sort of,
What
and if you're looking solely for just like tangible results, it's hard to sort of quantify or say what those are, because we all have a different baseline with our thoughts, with our emotions, with our feelings, with our mental states of being. Dan Harris, who was the former weekend anchor at ABC Good Morning America, has a wonderful book called 10% Happier. That's the way that he qualifies his meditation practice. It's a good way to look at it. Takes the edge off a little bit, gives you hopefully a little bit more clarity, a little bit more patience.
Yeah, it sometimes we have these unrealistic goals, and then when we don't see immediate feedback, we give up on it. And that's a little bit what I've done in my meditation. One of the things you say in the book is knowing what you can and can't control and focusing on that. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, working with a lot of these athletes or even educators or corporate types, a lot of times we fixate on things we have no control over. And it does us no good. Actually, it really makes us kind of more frustrated. So one thing when I work with individuals, we really focus on, you've got to make your primary focus the controllables and let go of the rest. It's almost what I said before, with the athletes, what we tell them. It's kind of let go or be dragged. And, that's all we can do at the end of the day. We may not always be happy with every result that we have, but, you were talking about meditation. If it doesn't go perfect or really well, sometimes people quit. Well, we advise against having a perfection mindset. When we have a perfection mindset, nothing's ever going to live up to our expectation, and we're going to be more apt to quit or get frustrated. Instead of having a perfection mindset, we encourage people to have a growth mindset. And I would imagine this would especially be helpful with your wonderful audience members who are dealing with their loved ones on a daily basis who have disabilities. And I know it could probably be really stressful at times, but when you have a growth mindset, you're not expecting perfection. You expect to have some mistakes or mishaps or things that come up unintentional, and you deal with them. Instead of seeing everything that doesn't go the way that we want it to go as a failure or a mistake, we should see it as a learning opportunity. That's what having a growth mindset is all about.
Um, it makes me think sometimes the Ken and the Kents. So I am not a parent of biological children, but I have friends that are. And in the disability community, one of the things that is the biggest kind of first step on that journey is when your son or daughter is diagnosed. And maybe my grandfather was the first person, my grandparents were the first people that I ever interviewed before we started Alabama Care. I just wanted to get to know kind of their story and my aunt's story. And that is a big part of that process. And his thing was, it was a letting go for him of all of the some of the hopes that he had that his daughter would bring home children, and that she would go, to work and these types of things. And she can have a great life. It's just not going to be the one that I envisioned for her. And when I read that, focus on what you can and can't have an effect over, um, in the book, it reminded me of that conversation that I had with my grandparents. But I know that process of the disability journey for parents is extremely hard.
Oh, I can't imagine, without a doubt. And we can always spend time ruminating or being upset about the way that we think things should be. But when we start shoulding like that, right, on ourselves or about the situation, we're only setting ourselves up for just to be miserable. One thing about mindfulness and being in the present moment, it's all about the situation and the experience at hand. Like I said, we plan for the future, we learn from the past, but really we shouldn't resist whatever we're having to deal with in the present moment because we're going to have to deal with it anyway. We should act like each and every present moment has been handed to us on a silver platter and it's a gift. One, because we're going to have to deal with it and experience it anyway, but life is so short. So each and every present moment is really a gift. If we're fortunate to live to be 80 years old, that's 4,000 weeks of life. When you put it that way, that's not a lot of time.
Yeah, when you're in the moment, I don't think about that. I had a conversation with my father. He still lives in Pennsylvania. I live in Alabama now. But if we go at we don't see each other very often, maybe once, maybe twice a year. And it's like we may see each other 60, 70 more times before he passes away. And that's a very
Exactly.
sobering thought.
Yeah.
And
Scary.
it's tough to put in perspective. On a little bit lighter note, I do have a 91-year-old grandmother down here in Alabama that, um, I kind of help out with. And she likes to watch the news. And she gets all riled up by this news. And my thing is, Grandma, can you do anything about it? What's the one thing you can do? You can go vote. You can start getting involved in politics. But if you can't do anything about it, you got to turn off the TV if it's making y'all flustered about that. I can't do anything about overseas. The news's job is to make the things they're worried about my worries. And, I can't do anything about that.
Exactly right. It's exactly what we were talking about with the internet and social media. The news wants to get us glued in as well. So
Mhm. Yeah. Now, one of the things that I was thinking on is the meditation, the mindfulness, the visualization. Sometimes we feel like we have to set aside specific times. But are there things that we're doing in our life, in our daily life, that we could incorporate some of these things? Or is that overlapping and we should keep meditation to the side? For instance, a lot of people say, or are you familiar with Reddit?
I am. I'm not on it, but I know what it is. I've looked at threads before, but yeah.
There's a whole subreddit of just called shower thoughts. And people will say, "Oh, I had this thought in the shower." Can we or should we start introducing like meditation into the shower, or should I put that time aside to be by itself?
It's interesting you're talking about shower thoughts because a lot of times we jump out of bed, we get our day started, say we don't meditate. And I say our minds are a lot like jet airplane engines. They take off if left unattended, and we're left chasing our thoughts the rest of the day. So, one of the things I talked about yesterday in this keynote I was telling you about, think about how many times you jump in the shower and your thoughts just run away. You don't even mentally realize that you're in the shower. And the next thing you know, you're like, have I lathered my hair yet or not? Because mentally, I'm not in the shower. I'm already in my first meeting of the day at work with 12 other people in the boardroom thinking about what's going on. So there are little things that we can do. One little simple thing that I worked for 5 years as part of the high performance team at LSU. I worked with their basketball team. we would teach the players to try to have their feet and their minds in alignment as much as possible. It's a mindfulness technique. So obviously, if they're on the basketball court, their feet were there. We wanted their mind to be there. In other words, we didn't want them thinking about anything else other than basketball. And if their mind wandered, we would tell them to bring it back to where their feet were. And we'd tell them if their feet were in the classroom, we'd want their mind to be in the classroom. And if their mind wandered, bring it back. If their feet were in a social situation, we wanted their mind to be in a social situation. So, yeah, there are little things that you can do. I don't like sort of and I'm not suggesting this is what you're saying it is. I don't like little hacks, but there are some
Yeah.
techniques that you can do that's sort of applied mindfulness. But what I would say is meditation is the anchor and the foundational layer of any sort of mindfulness practice. But the ultimate
Um,
goal is to be able to apply sort of that meditation aspect when you get distracted or sort of emotionally disrupted. You can focus on what's important, whatever you're doing. And you learn that through meditation.
you have to have that anchor of meditation to be able to do it outside. So what I'm hearing is when you're in the shower, wash your hair, wash your body, get out.
Without,
Do
yeah,
your
or take your time, but just notice the little things like, what does the warm water feel like on my skin? What does the soap smell like? All that kind of stuff, those sensory details again. Focus on stuff. Focus on what you're doing. Thich Nhat Hanh, the famous Vietnamese Zen master, was one of the pioneers of mindfulness in the West. And he had a saying, when you're washing the dishes, wash the dishes. You're not thinking about what the next task is, or you're not thinking about picking up the dry cleaning or the light bill or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I
I
guess the way the nomenclature I would use is try to monotask. Multitasking is not helpful. We all pride ourselves in this accelerated culture of being great multitaskers, but all the science shows that we're terrible at doing 10 things at once. Have a list, do one thing at a time and knock it out. You're going to do a better job with all those things that way.
You might be doing 10 things, but they're all at 20%, and it'll take you longer
Exactly.
as if you did 100% of 10 in a row there. One of the things that I find myself doing is trying to block out any other noise when I concentrate. So I've got one thing on my list that I'm going to conquer right now. I'll find myself queuing up a Spotify playlist where I don't have to think about the music. There's something constant buzzing in the background. What are your thoughts on that? Do you come into contact with that? Or even basketball players, when they're warming up, a lot of them will wear headphones.
Yeah, there's a couple things. One, when you're meditating, I would say don't have music on, because I think it really sort of disturbs sort of your thought process and your focus. But two, a little bit of white noise as a filter when you're trying to do something and harness focus isn't a bad thing at all. I'll do it sometimes as well. I'll put on some
Okay.
really benign, slow, uh, lyricless music, like classical music or something from time to time when I just want to chill out and get involved in a task.
So I can still do that. Yes. Neuroplasticity is something that I've come into contact with just recently. And then it was once again mentioned in your book. Tell us a little bit about neuroplasticity.
Yeah, neuroplasticity basically is in our prefrontal cortex of our mind. Um, it's over critical thinking skills, the prefrontal cortex. And basically, with our brains, the way that they work, neurons that fire together end up wiring together. So, in other words, the more you do something like meditate, your brain is malleable and you're cutting neural pathways in your mind. You're reshaping your mind, not just the way that your mind thinks, but sort of the physical brain structure of your mind, if that makes sense.
Do you see that technique used a lot with maybe survivors or PTSD?
I would think it would be. It could be. I'm not a neurologist, so I don't there's been probably in the last 10 to 12 years a lot of burgeoning research in the mindfulness world where these neurologists are taking fMRIs, brain scans, and one of the things that they've seen with meditators is the gray matter in the prefrontal cortex that I was talking about is substantially thicker, which is a good thing. So that gives us more control over the way that we regulate our thoughts and emotions. And there's another part of our brain in the limbic region called the amygdala, which is sort of our regulator over fear and anxiety. And they see how that's changed substantially through meditation as well. So there's
I think
great
that's a
science. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's a great, for anyone that's watching, you have the ability to kind of rewire your brain with these techniques, with the breathing, with the meditation, the visualization, and that's almost like this is where I want to be in 5 years. I can think like that, do all the work, and I'm more likely to get there if I'm both firing my body and my brain on that path. And you
Yeah.
have that ability. You're not stuck just thinking your same old thoughts. I think that helps some people that may feel a little bit lost or down and out, gives us that responsibility back. And that can be powerful knowing that that's possible.
Oh, without a doubt. If anyone is interested in this, I highly recommend you do a search on YouTube of neuroplasticity and London taxi cab drivers. So to be a taxi cab driver in London, the testing is arduous. It's a difficult thing to become. It's not like they just put it in their Waze app like the rest of us and they know how to get wherever from using their app. They have to actually memorize all the winding, difficult roads in London. And basically, they tested these London cab drivers with these brain scan machines, these fMRIs, kind of before and after, and the way that the structure of their brains changed after doing all this sort of testing and learning these routes is amazing. So, like you said, we're just starting in science to learn sort of the potential of the way that, for lack of a better way to say it, we can sort of reprogram, re-engineer, even sort of physically restructure our brains. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it is amazing. You got to put in the work, though. Like you said, it's not like The Secret or something where you think there's a $10,000 check outside and there's going to be one. You got to put in the work there. And part of that is being consistent. So I've mentioned that I have not been consistent in my meditation, only done it a handful of times. But you need to start doing it every day and be mindful every day. Set out a little bit of time in the morning.
Correct. Mornings are the most important time of the day because they set the tone for the rest of the day.
Quick one-off question here. I always see meditation being legs crossed, sitting very upright. That hurt, like my knees hurt me, my lower back hurts me. I prefer to lay down, but am I doing it wrong?
No, I think it's fine to lay down, but what I would recommend is when you're doing your morning meditation, it's important for your spine to be straight. So, being an old former runner and I have no knees now, there's no way in heck I'm getting down on the ground in the lotus position at my age. Getting down isn't the hard part, getting up is. But so, what I recommend is you sit in a chair and your feet are flat on the ground and your spine is straight, head is slightly tilted up. It's the best way to do it. I would recommend lying down, maybe doing body scan meditations at night.
Yep. I like the chair. I can settle on the chair as opposed to the lotus. And then I do like to lay down at nighttime. Okay. What have you learned, or what is something new that you'd like to share your experiences since publishing the book?
Oh, wow. So much. So the book, I guess, is probably about 4.5 years old now. And by the way, you can get that on Amazon still.
We put the
There's
link
been,
in the chat.
thank you. I learn every day. I definitely try to embody having a growth mindset. I journal, I take notes. I'm a voracious reader. Um, I would think probably some of the stuff that's not in the book is what I was talking about earlier is the ability to coach ourselves up. I was talking about the athletes listening to their internal dialogue and learning to listen to it. You'll be surprised how negative it is. And it's not an evil or a bad thing. Like we were talking about earlier, it's the way that we're wired to protect ourselves. But listen to that and learn how to encourage yourself instead of shutting down when that happens. I would think that's been the biggest thing for me in terms of building resilience. And for me personally, for a long time, I'd say most of my life, I had a perfectionist mindset. So I've always had high expectations for myself, and I would give myself very little grace if I fell short of a goal or I didn't do perfectly on that specific task. I've learned to give myself a little more grace. I still have high expectations, but I don't beat myself up as much when I fall short. I just kind of regroup, so to speak, coach myself up, find a new path to get there, and I try to do it that way.
So be a little bit more aware of the self-talk in the moment. You mentioned you have 48 thoughts every minute. And if you can just sway some of those, you'll have a much better outcome in the end. Don't be so hard on yourself. You're doing a great job. You can still have high expectations. Because on the one end, you don't, in some scenarios, it's not like you want everybody to get a participation trophy. So you do need to be a little bit of how do you measure that? But the self-talk will help you get past that point. As we come to a close, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think a parent of a child with a disability or an individual with a disability could benefit from hearing?
Yeah, I would just go sort of back to the self-compassion thing and compassion fatigue. You've got to really take care of yourself first. And I'm not just talking about getting enough sleep and from a physical health perspective, exercising. We all know that stuff. But from an emotional perspective, um, know that what you're doing is not easy and you have to allow yourself grace and forgiveness. There's no playbook or manual on what you're doing. I have the utmost respect for what you're all doing and going through, and your children are lucky to have you. And, sounds really cheesy, but take a little time and love yourself up every now and then.
Very well said. Once again, guys, slow your roll on Amazon right now. Mindfulness for Fast Times. I'm almost done. So if you guys want to do a book club with me, let me know what your thoughts and feelings are. Mr. Graber, once again, thank you very much for giving us some of your time this afternoon. We appreciate everything that you do and spreading the word and the audiences and communities that you help. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed it immensely.
And like I said, we'll go ahead and send you the links. At this time, what we like to do is we like to give our respective cameras a little wave, and we'll say, see you guys next week. Mr. Graber, thanks again.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too. And we can exit out of the windows, and